The Indian Wars, the invasion, the conflicts, the conquests, the truth about what was next in the real West.
In a past that is now lost forever, there was a time when the land was sacred and the ancient ones were as one with it. A time when only the children of the Great Spirit were here to light their fires in these places with no boundaries. When the forests were as thick as the fur of the winter bear. When a warrior could walk from horizon to horizon on the backs of the buffalo. When the deserts were in bloom and the streams pure as freshly fallen snow. In that time when there were only simple ways, I saw with my heart the conflicts to come. And whether it was to be for good or bad, what was certain was that there would be change.
The earth was created by assistance of the sun, and it should be left as it was. The country was made without lines of demarcation, and it is no man's business to divide it. The earth and myself are of one mind. Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce.
The American Indian people has always seen land as not to be owned. It can never be possessed. It was part of a family, part of your nature. They always considered it Mother Earth.
When the Euro-American came, he saw a land that was empty of the kind of things that defined life and civilization for him. There were no towns and cities, there were no fences, there were none of the things that were familiar to him that represented civilization. The Indians, the Native Americans of North America, were just another obstacle as far as he was concerned.
The basic underlying problem is simply a failure to comprehend each other, a cultural gulf so vast that neither could understand or communicate with the other in any meaningful terms.
When these two cultures came together, change for both was inevitable.
For the Native Americans, this change was immediate and dramatic, even if they never came in contact with the whites. Diseases brought by the Europeans swept across the continent, wiping out whole tribes. Trade with the Europeans became vital to the survival of the tribes, because those who got guns were those who would triumph in traditional intertribal wars.
For individual tribes, especially those on the East Coast, where the European settlements began to concentrate in the 1600s, early contact with these light-skinned strangers first seemed a positive thing.
If you look at what happened in New England, they immediately felt responsible for these poor Europeans who didn't know how to raise corn, for instance. So there was a friendliness between them in the beginning. What changed it was the greed of the Europeans. They wanted more and more and more. And the Indian couldn't comprehend why these strangers from across the ocean were so greedy.
When the first offer was made to buy Mother Earth, there was probably a lot of confusion and possibly some laughter. How could you sell your mother, you know?
Conflict over land made peace short-lived. In 1622, the Powhatans of Virginia would be the first of many East Coast tribes to rebel against white expansion.
As the whites expanded their plantations, and as their agriculture required more and more land, the Powhatans were pushed further westward. They responded, of course, with violence, and on 2 occasions almost completely wiped out the Virginia colony. And terrible racial war followed.
Not being content with taking away life alone, the Indians fell again upon the dead, facing, dragging, mangling the dead carcasses into many pieces, and carrying some parts away in derision, with base and brutish triumph. Survivor, Jamestown Massacre, 1622.
This brutality appears in so many of the accounts of the early settlers, but the Europeans were as brutal as the Indians. The treatment of the bodies of the slain were just as bad as the Indians' treatment of the whites.
With their superior firepower, the colonists struck back, nearly exterminating the Powhatans. The fate of this once powerful people foreshadowed what would soon become of most of the eastern tribes.
Where today are the Pequot? Where are the Narragansett, the Mohican, the Pokanoket, and many other once powerful tribes of our people? They have vanished before the greed and the oppression of the white man, as snow before the summer sun, Tecumseh of the Shawnees.
As the 18th century dawned over fertile new land, rival European nations battled each other for its control in bloody conflicts like the French and Indian Wars. Each side hired Indians as mercenaries, further dividing the factionalized tribes against each other. But a few visionary Indian leaders saw that feuds between rival tribes were weakening their defense against the onslaught of white civilization. First Pontiac in 1790, then Tecumseh in 1810, tried to unite all Indians in bold attempts to drive the Europeans from the continent.
The way and the only way to check and stop this evil is for all the red men to unite in claiming a common and equal land. Let the white race perish back whence they came. Upon a trail of blood, they must be driven. Tecumseh.
I think Indian people were not able to unify in mass because there'd been many, many years of traditional enemies. I mean, part of your tradition was that you fight these people. So to give up those traditions in force of this unknown threat was ludicrous. And even then, I don't think they realized the significance of the threat.
They were outgunned. They didn't manufacture powder. They didn't manufacture ammunition or guns. They couldn't win. It was one loss after another. And in almost all cases, the leaders would be hunted down and killed.
At the close of the American Revolution, a new nation began to take shape, one determined to expand further westward, no matter what the cost.
We now return to the Indian Wars.
Is one of the fairest portions of the globe to remain in a state of nature, the haunt of a few wretched savages, when it seems destined by the Creator to give support to a large population and to be the seat of civilization, of science, and of true religion? William Henry Harrison, 1811.
As the young American nation took root, a new phase of the Indian Wars began. For the decades following the War of 1812, there would be fewer casualties on the battlefields. Instead, thousands of Native Americans would fall victim to President Andrew Jackson's westward expansion plan, a seizing of traditional Indian lands called the General Removal Act.
The General Removal Act has a rather scary ring because it meant exactly what it suggests, and that is that any Indian group living east of the Mississippi River could be moved to new lands west of the Mississippi River.
Early American explorers to the region had called the Great Plains the Great American Desert. Whites would never want to go there, they said. And so policymakers truly believed that the Indians would be protected there until they could reach the so-called American level of civilization.
The theory was that there would be a permanent Indian frontier, which extended all the way from Fort Snelling, Minnesota, down basically the western borders of Iowa, Missouri, and Arkansas and Louisiana to the Gulf of Mexico.
In one sense, it was an answer to a problem. In one sense, it could have avoided a lot of conflict. But anytime you take a group of people out of an area, geographic area that they're used to, and is a part of their lives for a long, long time, it just isn't going to work.
The principal targets for removal were the Indians known to whites as the 5 civilized tribes.
The 5 civilized tribes were the Cherokees, the Creeks, the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, and the Seminoles. They were called civilized because, as a means of self-defense, they had borrowed heavily from white institutions in an endeavor to preserve their own culture and land and independence.
The Cherokees did not respond with the tomahawk. They didn't rise up in rebellion against the government. They went to the courts, and they took their case to the United States Supreme Court, where they won.
But President Jackson defied the Supreme Court ruling, and during the 1830s sent the United States Army to force the civilized tribes from their ancestral lands.
They just took these people right out of their homes. In fact, some of them were hoeing their gardens and cooking when the military just came right up to their homes and told them, "Pack up, you are leaving." And on the way, there was a lot of tragedy. Some 4,000 died on the way, and possibly an additional 4,000 died as a result of the removal that these people call the Trail of Tears.
In the chill of a drizzling rain on an October morning, I saw them, loaded like cattle or sheep into 600 wagons, and started toward the west. When the bugle sounded and the wagons started rolling, many of the children waved their little hands goodbye to their mountain homes. Army Private, 1838.
Despite the thousands of deaths that resulted from moving to a strange and hostile new environment, the Cherokees and other victims of removal began to adapt to their new homes behind the line of the permanent Indian frontier. There, the government promised them they could dwell forever in peace, along with the tribes of the Southwest and the Plains, who had, so far, had little contact with the white man.
With the triumph of the United States in the Mexican War, the permanent Indian frontier wasn't very permanent. And we had new territories to the west: Arizona, New Mexico, Utah to the north, Colorado. The discovery of gold in California changed everything. Thousands now streamed across the prairies, heading for California and the gold fields. A continental nation required a rethinking of Indian policy.
The
Plains Indians were not aware that there was a steady stream of people that was never going to stop. I don't think that the tribes could comprehend the total number of people that would be coming.
We now return to the Indian Wars.
The Northern Plains Indians and some of your southern tribes were warrior societies. Warfare was nature to them. The lifestyle of the American Indian warrior needed warfare because it was a way for the man to establish himself in his society. It was a way to gain status within the tribe.
Hundreds of these tribes populated the West. The Sioux or Lakota dominated the northern plains, with other groups like the Crow, their traditional enemies. The Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, and Comanche ruled the South, while the Apache and Navajo were the lords of the Southwest. These warrior societies posed a threat to immigration.
With all of these Americans heading west, something must be done to get the Indians out of the way.
As a temporary solution, the government turned to a time-honored but tragically flawed means of dealing with the red man, making treaties with him.
Implicit in the treaty relationship is that the people who sign those treaties can carry out the promises they made in the treaties. Well, the poor Indians not only didn't understand what was in the treaty, but Indian political structure was such that no one who signed could speak for anyone but himself.
And so when there would be depredations along the Oregon Trail or wherever, it would always come back that the Indians violated the treaty. Well, these people may not even known about the treaty or may not even had any clue that there was ever even a treaty.
But as the breakdown of the permanent Indian frontier had shown, the whites were even more likely than the Indians to disregard the promises of their treaties.
By the 1850s and 1860s, treaties had become documents of expediency for the United States government. They were simply a way to buy time. But the government miscalculated the time it needed to buy. It miscalculated how quickly the West would fill up with whites.
In 1862, an influx of settlers into the Minnesota Territory and another broken treaty would trigger the bloody uprising to begin a new cycle of Indian wars in the West. Cousins of the proud Lakota or Teton Sioux of the Plains, the Minnesota Santee Sioux had ceded most of their ancestral lands to the whites by 1850. In exchange, they were granted annuities, payments in food rations from the government.
The Santee had grown dependent on those goods. They had by and large ceased to be a hunting society. So these annuities and these goods that they got from the Americans were very, very necessary. Without them, they would starve.
But by the 1860s, the government's mounting Civil War expenses began to take precedence over food promised the Indians by treaty. The Santee's annuities either came late or they didn't arrive at all.
We made a treaty with the government and beg for what we do get, and can't get that till our children are dying of hunger. Little Crow of the Santee Sioux.
So far as I'm concerned, if they are hungry, let them eat grass or their own dung. Andrew Myrick, Indian agent.
Outraged and starving, the Santee stormed the warehouse and took by force what little food they could find. Soon afterward, a group of Indian teenagers killed some white settlers while trying to steal eggs from their farm. Santee leader Little Crow found himself in a no-win situation.
Little Crow had long been a friend of the whites, and now the tribal leadership turned to him and he said, we've got to stand behind the kids. Let's go to war. And so it just all blew up.
Braves, you're like dogs in the hot moon when they run mad and snap at their own shadows. The white men are like locusts when they fly so thick that the whole sky is a snowstorm. Kill 1, 2, 10, and 10 times will come to kill you. Little Crow is not a coward. He will die with you. Little Crow, 1862.
The Indians went on a real rampage. I mean, they killed anything between 400 and 800 settlers within a matter of a week or two. It was a bloody uprising, replete with all manner of barbarism that infuriated the whites.
That Indian agent who had told the Sioux if they were hungry they might eat grass was found lying on the ground on his back, his sightless eyes staring at the sky and his mouth filled with grass.
But under General Henry Sibley, a militia was quickly raised to quell the uprising. All surviving Santee braves who didn't escape surrendered. 303 of them were condemned to be publicly hanged.
President Lincoln intervened. The number was reduced to 38, but it was the largest mass execution in American history. And it suggested that this wasn't viewed as a war. In fact, they were treated as though they were murderers, and as though the causes that had impelled them to take action were not legitimate.
They totally lost their land. What they wanted to protect in the first place, the whites finally acquired without having to pay a red cent for it.
Little Crow and some of his people fled to Canada. Other Santee Sioux to the west.
Little Crow tried to talk to some of the Lakota, or the Western Sioux leaders, and impress upon them what the white people were like. I think it kind of fell on deaf ears. I mean, I think the Lakota felt strong enough and powerful enough to deal with these kinds of things, but they themselves were on the verge of conflicts of their own.
We now return to the Indian Wars.
The buffalo was so important to the nomadic Plains Indian people. It was the center of their culture. A Crow woman said it best, and she said, "Our hearts fell to the ground when the buffalo was being killed, and our hearts were never raised again."
We will not have the wagons which make a noise in the hunting grounds of the buffalo. If the paleface comes further into our land, there will be scalps of your brothers in the lodges of the Cheyennes. I have spoken. Romanos of the Cheyennes, 1864.
Within tribes like the Cheyennes, divisions rose over how to deal with the white problem that threatened their very survival.
The Cheyennes split into two major groups, the Northern Cheyennes and the Southern Cheyennes. Black Kettle, Southern Cheyenne, was a leader of the ones who advocated for peace. Roman Nose, on the other hand, was a leader of the War Society.
While the peace camps tried to compromise with the white men, the warrior societies increased their harassment of settlements and travelers.
Now, Indian raids were rare. Very few people were killed. But nevertheless, there was a sense of insecurity, and it preyed upon Westerners, and it was real to them. They wanted this problem solved. They didn't care how it was done.
With the carnage of Minnesota's Santee Sioux uprising fresh in their minds, frightened settlers turned to the army for protection. As the military increased its pressure on the Plains tribes, Black Kettle and his Southern Cheyennes signed a treaty that they believed would guarantee them protection. They even moved their village to a place called Sand Creek, near Fort Lyon, as proof of their peaceful intentions. But to the citizens of nearby Denver, any Indian was a threat, treaty or not. They raised their own Indian fighting force, called the 3rd Colorado Cavalry. Led by Colonel John M. Chivington, a former minister.
Damn any man who sympathizes with Indians. I have come to kill Indians and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians. John M. Shivington, 1864.
After ensuring that the young braves of Black Kettle's camp had gone north to hunt buffalo, Shivington organized an attack on the village, now mostly women, children, and older men, just before dawn on November 7, 1864.
From down the creek, a large body of troops was advancing at a rapid trot. I looked towards the chief's lodge and saw that Black Kettle had a large American flag fluttering in the gray light of the winter dawn. I heard him call to the people not to be afraid, that the soldiers would not hurt them. And then the troops opened fire from two sides of the camp. George Ben, giant half-breed massacre survivor.
Hours later, some 200 Cheyennes, two-thirds of them women and children, lay dead on the banks of Sand Creek.
And going over the battleground the next day, I did not see a body of man, woman, or child, but was scalped and mutilated in the most horrible manner. These atrocities that were committed were with the knowledge of J.M. Shivington, Lieutenant James Connor, 3rd Colorado Cavalry.
Southern Cheyennes went north and joined the Northern Cheyennes, who were allies with the Sioux people, and they told the stories about what happened. And from that point on, for a long period of time, nobody trusted any of the military leaders.
They decide they will have to retaliate. For the next several months, it was really open war all across the plains as a result of Sand Creek.
At the same time, news of the massacre at Sand Creek horrified white humanitarians in the East.
It convinced many Americans that these Indian wars must cease, that the Indians must be treated with fairly, and that negotiation was the answer, not warfare.
This new pressure on the U.S. military leaders to compromise with the Indians would have a direct effect on what was to become known as Red Cloud's War.
Red Cloud was one of the Oglala Lakota leaders. And his main problem was the encroachment of whites along the Bozeman Trail, through Powder River country, through prime hunting territory, on up into the gold fields up in Montana. And he tried to negotiate a way for the white people to stay out.
And during the treaty negotiations, he noticed that the troops were already there to build the forts. Enraged, he told the whites that he would resist.
We were told that they wished merely to pass through our country. Yet before the ashes of the council fire are cold, the Great Father is building his forts among us. His presence here is an insult and a threat. Lakotas, I am for war. Red Cloud, Fort Laramie, 1866.
Red Cloud was a clever enough military man to know that even with his large following, he didn't have the weapons to attack a fort and drive them away. What he hoped to do was to make it so difficult for them that they just leave voluntarily.
But instead of being able to protect the travelers on the Bozeman Trail, the soldiers in the forts simply had to protect themselves and were virtually besieged.
The famous turning point of Red Cloud's War was his warriors' ambush of Captain Judd Fetterman, who was sent from Fort Phil Kearny to defend a party of woodcutters with an outfit of 80 men.
Captain Fetterman has gone down in history as the epitome of military arrogance. He had boasted that with 80 men he could ride through the whole Sioux Nation. Not a man who rode with Captain Fetterman that December day. I'll live to tell the tale.
The Fetterman disaster convinced the U.S. government to send a negotiating commission to try again with Red Cloud. who refused to even enter Fort Laramie until the Bozeman Trail forts were abandoned.
The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 actually was a loss of land for the Sioux. They were to have Dakota west of the Missouri River as their prescribed reservation. The Powder River and Yellowstone country was unceded Indian hunting territory in which they could roam so long as the game justified the chase.
The expectation being that once the buffalo were all gone, those who had remained in the Powder River country would have to go to the reservation. But what upset that logical progression was the discovery of gold in the Black Hills.
The Black Hills had been sacred to the Indians for centuries. In 1874, just 6 years after the Fort Laramie Treaty promised the hills to the Lakota forever, an expedition led by General George Armstrong Custer announced to the world that the hills contained gold.
As far as we Indians were concerned, gold did crazy things to white people. And it's true. And once the word leaked out, hundreds and thousands of people came into the Black Hills, and there was just no turning them around.
This is an instantly recognizable violation of the Treaty of 1868. White citizens are very uncomfortable with the knowledge that they have broken a treaty. There has to be some way to legalize the existence of white settlers in the Black Hills.
The federal government sent a commission to the Sioux Indians and asked them to sell the Black Hills. And the Sioux handled that commission by simply rejecting the offer.
By this time, the Lakota were split into two factions. The agency Sioux under Red Cloud, who were already living on the reservation, but who would never sell their lands without the support of the Free Sioux, or Northern Roamers, who under Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull haunted the Powder River hunting grounds, refusing to give up the old ways.
The government, meanwhile, had already decided to settle the problem once and for all. Orders were issued that the Northern Roamers had to come in and report to their agencies or else be declared hostile and war made upon them.
Against these so-called hostile Indians, the Army unleashed all its fury.
In command of the United States Army was General William Tecumseh Sherman, famous for his march to the sea for devastating Georgia. In command of the Army in the West was General Phil Sheridan. Sherman and Sheridan were masters of total war. The civilian population had to suffer. Starvation, disease would lead to cries for peace. That's how they won the Civil War, and that's how they were determined to win the Indian Wars.
We now return to the Indian Wars.
Wherever we went, the soldiers came to kill us, and it was all our own country. The treaty with Red Cloud said it would be ours as long as the grass should grow and the water flow. They were chasing us now because we remembered and they forgot. Black Elk.
Throughout the winter, spring, and summer of 1876, the Army pressed on against the Sioux. A turning point came on June 25th, 1876, when General George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry made their attack on a giant Indian encampment on the river of the Little Bighorn.
There were perhaps 7,000 Indians in that great encampment. Not only the Northern Roamers, but hundreds more from the various agencies, flocking for one last summer of the old ways on the plains. Custer's regiment was destroyed. He and 212 men under his immediate command were killed. It was the greatest victory the Indians ever won in the Trans-Mississippi West, the Sioux's greatest day, and of course, the day of their greatest defeat.
The news of Custer's defeat reached the East during the celebration of the nation's centennial. America was shocked, humiliated, and determined on revenge.
By that fall, the United States has concentrated 1/3 of its entire military strength in the theater of the Sioux War, and the Sioux lose battle after battle.
There was a significant continuing military campaign that was basically search and destroy. You continue to annihilate the buffalo, and then you continue to attack the Indian and don't let him hunt. You keep him moving, and so that he doesn't have time to put in supplies, and that just wore the Indian people down, so they eventually surrendered.
One by one, the great warrior leaders straggled into the forts to lay down their arms. Even Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, once the symbols of Lakota resistance.
I wish it to be remembered that I was the last man of my tribe to surrender my rifle. And today, I have given it to you, Sitting Bull.
With the Sioux in the north, the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, and Comanche in the south, all restricted to reservations, the Army began its assault on the last remaining free tribes.
After the defeat of the Sioux in the Great Sioux War, the nature of Indian warfare changed. The typical Indian war after 1876 was the flight of the Nez Perce, or the pursuit of Geronimo's renegades in Arizona. Small scale, bitterly fought guerrilla wars. But now, all the advantages were with the Army.
In the Northwest, the Nez Perce tribe, led by the great Chief Joseph, made a dramatic attempt to escape from the pursuing army.
When the Nez Perce were ordered to leave their beloved country to go to a place somewhere else, in a reservation, they didn't want to go, and most refused to go. An army was sent to move them, and they began to flee.
Joseph guided his people on a trek that was incredible. He went through the Yellowstone area, eventually made it into the Bear Paw Mountains area, not too far from the Canadian border. But the military eventually caught up with him, and there he surrendered.
It is cold, and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. Hear me, my chiefs. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more, forever. Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce, October 5th, 1877.
By September of 1886, even the fearsome Apaches of the Southwest would submit to defeat.
The end of true campaigning for the Indian Wars. The end of all those years of upheaval, beginning with Columbus, came at Skeleton Canyon, when Geronimo and his pitiful remnant of Apaches were finally forced to submit and to surrender to General Nelson Miles. But in the nation as a whole, there was a sigh of relief. And very quickly, the horror of those wars was romanticized. It was the cavalry riding to the rescue, expanding the boundaries of American civilization. That glorious memory became part of American folklore and part of the great legend of the West.
But for the Native American, there was only the bleak reality, a future of life on the reservation.
They couldn't go anywhere anymore. They couldn't hunt anymore. The warriors, the men of these tribes, could not prove their status. They could not express their abilities anymore. It broke down the culture as they knew it.
Diseases were running rampant. If you didn't die from malnutrition or hunger, you died from a broken heart.
Those generations of the 19th century and earlier saw nothing worth preserving in Indian culture. They wished to civilize the Indians, by which they meant transform them into a God-fearing yeoman farmer class of citizens. They didn't realize this couldn't be done overnight, if ever it could be done.
The white people never understood that. They never understood that the Indian people didn't want to be like them. They didn't desire to be like white people. They wanted to live the way they had always lived and value the things that they valued.
It makes my heart sick when I think of all the good words and all the broken promises. Too many misinterpretations have been made. Too many misunderstandings have come up between the white man about Indians. Chief Joseph.
I guess it had to end that way in warfare because of the very nature of the warrior societies. They had to fight back when their lands were being invaded upon. I really don't know if it could have ended any other way. Unfortunately, the differences were just too deep.
For the Indian peoples of North America, there was a loss of their very way of life. But white America also paid a terrible price because in the duplicity of their dealings with the tribes, in the harshness of the war that they made, Americans lost their innocence. America now has to reassess its past through a different lens and see that the conquest wasn't quite so glorious.
We've all lost, and that's the sad part about the story of the West.
I see, as in a vision, the dying spark of our council fires, the ashes cold and white. I see no longer the curling smoke rising from our lodge poles. The antelope have gone, the buffalo walls are empty. Only the wail of the coyote is heard. My heart is cold within me. My eyes are growing dim. I am old. Chief Blitiku, 1909.
This is the Biography Channel.
You want to be yourself, but you're not allowed to be yourself.
This is the Biography Channel.
I was just beside myself with anger and disappointment.
This is the Biography Channel.
I'm the only actress he knows you have to pay to keep your clothes on.
Reality meets personality, only on the Biography Channel.
Biography Channel. What a concept!